Okay, now let's take a look at the last two types of problems we'll come across when we're trying to factor a quadratic. This time, we are going to go through a longer process because our a value is not 1. So we do not have a GCF, so we are going to split our middle term, which is our linear term, into two linear terms that still add to 16x. So I'm going to get set up and write down my quadratic term and my constant. So I'm going to need 4 terms to do grouping. I'm going to use my graphic organizer, and it is A times C. Zoom in just a little bit. So A times C is 15, and the sum is 16. So we're splitting 16x into two numbers that multiply to give you 15 and add to 16. So that's going to be 15 and 1. So we're going to rewrite the linear term into plus 15x plus 1x. Now that we have 4 terms, and remember, these are both linear terms that still add to 16x. The second step, or the next step, is to group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. This is where the term grouping comes into play. Now that we have 2 groups of 2, we're going to factor the GCF from each of these. The greatest common factor for these 2 terms is 3x. When I divide 3x from these 2 terms, factor out the 3x, I'm left with x plus 5. Now don't lose your operator here, so we're going to factor out a positive GCF of 1 here. So this is going to be a GCF of 1, and when I factor out 1 from 1x, I get 1x, and when I factor 1 from 5, I get positive 5. This is a checkpoint. When these are the same, we know we're on the right track. Now we're going to write the 2 linear binomials. So we have 3x plus 1 times x plus 5, and these are your linear binomial factors. So you put the 2 GCFs to create one linear binomial factor, and then the one they have in common is your other factor. Now, if you have your x plus 5 first and then 3x plus 1, that's totally okay. Moving to the next one, there's no GCF, so we always ask that first. So we have to split the middle term, the linear term, so we can have 4 terms to group. 3 times 12 is 36, and our sum is negative 13. So we're going to split negative 13 into, let's see, negative 9 and negative 4. So that gives us a positive 36 and a negative 13. So I'm going to put my negative 9x first and then my negative 4x. You do not have to write them in this order, but your process will look, your steps will look a little different, and in the end, your binomials will be just like what I get. So orders, it doesn't matter. After we have 4 terms, that's where we're going to group. We're going to factor out the GCF, 3x, and then when we divide 3x from these 2 terms, we're left with x minus 3. Here we're going to have a negative 4, and when we factor out a negative 4 from negative 4x, we get positive x, and then 12 divided by negative 4 is negative 3. Check, check. We're going to write 3x minus 4 as one factor, and x minus 3 as the other factor. Okay, our last example for this one, there's no GCF. We're going to set up to split the middle using our graphic organizer. 7 times negative 6, negative 42. And we're going to split negative 11. Let's see. 6 and 7, that's not going to give us negative 11. So I think 14, let me check my calculator, 14 and 3, I think, is what works. Okay, so let's do 14 and 3, and we need a negative on the 14. So we're going to rewrite negative 11x into negative 14x plus 3x. Now we're going to group the first two and the last two, being very neat and organized. We're going to factor the GCF, so we can factor out 7x from the first two terms. We have a positive 3 to factor out. Check, check. So we're going to write 7x plus 3 as one factor, and then x minus 2 as our second factor. The last type that we'll work with, we're going to put both grouping when A is not 1 and have a GCF at the beginning. So we're going to ask, is there a GCF? I believe 2 is our GCF, so I'm going to write a 2. And then we're left with 9x squared minus 23x minus 12. Now, I am going to use brackets here because we're going to be doing grouping in just a minute with parentheses. So I'm going to set up to write, split this middle term just like we did over here. But I'm going to use brackets for this part. You'll see in just a minute why. Now I have 9 times negative 12, that's negative, I believe, 108. And then negative 23 is our sum, so we're going to split the middle. So I'm going to use my calculator. And let me go to my table. And we have 108 divided by x, and then just enter, enter, enter. And then you scroll until you see a pair that's going to give us a negative 23. So it looks like 27 and 4. So we have a 27 and 4. The 27 needs to be negative. So I'm going to rewrite negative 23x into negative 27x and then plus 4x. So this still gives me back what I started with. Now we're going to group. So this is why I use brackets for this part, because I have a GCF from the original. And then we're going to group and group. Bring down the 2. Now, just like over here, you're going to ask, what is the GCF here? So our GCF is 9x. That leaves me with x minus 3. Negative 27x divided by divided by 9x is negative 3. Then I have a positive. I'm going to factor out a positive 4. 4x divided by 4 is x. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. And check, check. Just bring down the 2. We're going to have 9x plus 4 times x minus 3. So this quadratic trinomial has 3 factors, the GCF and the 2 linear binomials. Okay, let's factor out. I believe that 4 is our GCF here. So we have 8x squared minus 7x, and then minus, 72 divided by 4. That gives us 18. And then we're going to split the middle so we can have 4 terms to do our grouping. Again, I'm going to use brackets, Try not to crowd yourself. Leave plenty of space. Remember, being neat and organized is key. Okay, and then 18 times 8, that gives us a negative 144. And then we have a negative 7 to split. So we're going to split the middle. So I'm going to use my table. So you go to table on your calculator. You put in your product of 144. I know it's negative, but I just kind of ignore the negative part. Divided by your variable x, and then enter, enter, enter. And I'm looking for a pair of numbers that can give me a 7. Let me see here. Put that down. I think 9 and 16. 9 and 16. Let's see if that works. A 9 and 16. So the negative needs to be on the 16 to give me a negative sum. So I'm going to split negative 7x into plus 9x minus 16x. Now we're going to do the grouping. So group the first two and the last two. Bring down your GCF of 4. Factor the GCF from each of the binomials. This is just simply x, leaving me with 8x plus 9. And then I'm going to factor out a negative, let's see, 2. That leaves me with, so negative 16x divided by negative 2 is 8x. Negative 18 divided by negative 2 is positive 9. Check, check. So I have 4 times x minus 2 times 8x minus 9. So again, the two GCFs create one binomial, and then the one they have in common is your second. So this has 3 factors. And then the last one. Looks like these are all even, so I think the GCF is going to be 2. So we're left with 6x squared plus 19x plus 8. We're going to split the middle. Graphic organizer, 6 times 8 is 48. And then we have 19. And so let's see, 48, here this. So 3 and 16, 3 and 16 are 2 factors. And so I'm going to split 19x into 3x and 16x. Now we're going to group. Bring down the GCF. Factor the GCF from each of these binomials. So I have 3x. That leaves me with 2x plus 1. Bring down a positive. It's going to be a positive 8. And I get 2x plus 1. Check, check. Bring down your GCF. 3x plus 8 is one binomial. And then we have the 2x plus 1 is our last factor. So it has 3 factors.